Hello, everybody. Welcome to the show today. When we planted our community orchard back in 2009, we had the best intentions. We were excited about future harvests, about community events in the space, but the fruit trees themselves that we chose, that was a little bit of an afterthought. I had read some books and read about specific varieties that I wanted to try, but it turns out that none of these varieties were available at our local garden center. So we just picked up some trees from the local garden center, planted them in our park, and that was the beginning of some of our problems. You see, later on, I realized that if you want to be successful growing fruit trees organically, the most important thing you can do is think carefully about which trees and cultivars you are going to plant and think about that in advance. Take your time and source the right trees, and that can make your growing experience so much easier. So, today we are going to talk about fruit tree garden design. And I have a very special guest today, and that is Colleen Dieter. She runs Red Wheelbarrow Landscape Consulting in Austin, Texas. She is an ISA Certified Arborist, and she's a graduate of my course, Certificate in Fruit Tree Care at orchardpeople.com. So, the goal today in our discussion is to explore how to design a fruit tree garden based on fact and not fantasy. What works, what grows, and what makes sense for any unique site. But first, do you have any ideas or questions or thoughts on fruit trees and garden design? If you're watching us on YouTube, please do put your questions or comments in the chat box and we'll reply as soon as we can. And please don't forget to click like and subscribe. So, Colleen, welcome to the show today.
Thank you, Susan. Thanks for having me. I'm so glad to
Oh,
be here.
I'm so happy. When I decided I wanted to do a show on this topic, I definitely wanted to interview you because I have seen some of the amazing gardens and landscapes that you have created so thoughtfully. And there aren't a lot of landscape designers or architects who really focus on fruit trees
hmm
because it's a whole different kettle of fish.
hmm
So, can we start off? Tell me what kinds of gardens you design for what kinds of people?
Well, most of my customers are do-it-yourselfers. They're folks who want to do the gardening themselves, but they don't really know where to start. Or they have problem spots where they keep trying things over and over again and not having success, and they need more professional advice about how to proceed.
So,
hmm
is this this is home growers with a backyard, or is this organizations?
Well, right now it's mostly home growers with a backyard, but I also sometimes get in terms of fruit trees and orchards, sometimes I get customers that have larger properties like ranches or farms, and they have someone who is maybe like a gardener on site who will be caring for the plants, and I'll work with them. But I do have a background of working in community orchards as well. I cared for the urban orchard in the Miller neighborhood here in Austin. And I also cared for an orchard in a community garden in Buda, Texas, about 10 years ago, too.
This is what I love about you. You are not just a bookish person who's looked it up in a books. You've done there. You've been there. You've done that. When I came to visit you in Austin, Texas, you took me to an absolutely gorgeous food forest. This is part of you and your experience. And I think that's the one passion that the two of us have so much in common, community growing, creating beautiful spaces. So, when you are sitting down with a new client, and I'm asking you this because let's imagine all our listeners are your client,
hmm
right? So, all our listeners are sitting and thinking, okay, tell me how to design my garden.
hmm
What are the main considerations and the main questions you ask people?
Well, I usually start with the consultation and I'll ask them like, what are you hoping to get out of our visit today? And what are your pain points? What are the problems that you're trying to solve? And what's on your wish list? What are the features that you're hoping to put into the landscape? And so that could be everything from a shed for storage or drainage problems, and they might need a rain garden or something like that. Yesterday, I was on a property where, they had huge pecan trees and their grass died under the pecan trees, and they were wondering, it was all muddy, and they were wondering how to mitigate that. So it just runs the gamut of I try to, really listen and hear what folks need. And sometimes they don't even really know what they need. Like sometimes I'll go into a yard and I'll see tools all over the place, and there's tools here and there and tomato cages over there. And I'll say, have you thought about getting a shed? Because maybe it can be really time consuming if you go out to do something quick in the garden and you can't find your tools. So just simple suggestions like that sometimes can really help folks make their gardening lives easier.
And even in terms of just so you're creating this big picture, so you're thinking in terms of the shed, where you're going to put your
Hmm.
tools. Maybe some people don't even realize that the fruit trees are going to need hands-on care.
Yeah, definitely. That's definitely a thing that people don't realize, how much care most fruit trees need, and they just don't have any frame of reference. And especially there's a lot of folks moving to Austin now who are from other regions, and they just don't have any idea about what the seasons are like here or what is possible to grow here. So it's very different, very unique climate and very unique terrain here. So just kind of filling people in on like what's actually possible and like what the wise path is for them, and not trying to do something that is going to be too high maintenance or too hard to care for.
So if I had a property in Austin and I'm like, my goal is I want a garden
Yeah,
with lots of fruit. I want to be
yeah,
harvesting so much fruit that I can have it myself. I can,
yeah.
what in Austin or in your area, what kind of fruits can you grow and how much fruit can you get out of a small garden?
Yeah, well, I usually also ask people what they like to eat. That's important because they'll just say, sometimes people will say, like, oh, well, we'd love to grow some food, we'd love to grow some fruit, and I'll say, like, well, what kind of fruit do you like? And that's important. And then I'll also ask them, what do you plan to do with the fruit? Do you want fruit that you can just eat out of hand? Or are you into baking pies or making jams and jellies? Because there's kind of different options. And so to answer your question, Susan, there's a lot of native wild fruits that do well here without much care. So red mulberries are an example of that. Red mulberry trees grow wild here. We have Mexican plums that are also sold readily as landscape plants, but they also can grow wild and they make really good fruit. And like the mulberries, you can eat out of hand off the tree. Like you don't have to cook them or anything like that. But the Mexican plums are pretty sour. And so with those, most people, cook something with them. They'll make jams or cook a pie, make a pie or something like that with those. So most of the wild fruits that are easier to grow usually need to be they usually need to have sugar added to them, or
And,
they're,
and by at that point, if it's still healthy
yeah.
and nutritious, who knows?
Well, sure, but it's still fun,
Yeah, of
and
course.
something to eat. And, we have a native persimmon here called Texas persimmon. And we also can grow Eastern persimmons, the American persimmons too, grow wild, depending on where you are in Austin. We're kind of right on the border between the habitats for those two species. And both of those trees are great, make a lot of fruit and are easy to grow, but the fruit, you can eat the fruit off the tree, but they have a lot of seeds in them. Not everybody is like amenable to that. Not everybody's okay with like eating a fruit with a whole bunch of seeds and then spitting out all the seeds. So, so then you start to get into a lot of people are really into that. Like they don't mind kind of a type of backyard foraging, if you will, but then sometimes I get people who are more interested in the more domesticated fruits, the things that you would typically think of when you think of fruit trees. So that would be things like apples and pears and peaches and the Japanese persimmons and nectarines, um, and plums. Those are all things that we grow here in Austin. Um, the thing that I just harvested yesterday and had this morning on my cereal was figs. And there's a long tradition of Texans growing figs, and figs do really well here without a lot of care. And I'm always encouraging people to grow figs because I think they're kind of the most like rewarding of the domestic fruit that we can grow pretty easily here.
I years and years ago did a landscape design certificate at a local university, and everybody wants an easy or no care garden
Yeah,
as if it actually exists.
yeah,
What you're saying is you can have fruit and enjoy fruit in your garden with minimal care. Now we're talking about domesticated trees like apples and peaches, pears, apricots, cherries, whatever. In terms of your climate,
hmm
and everybody's climate. Like, what are the things you consider when you go to choose for your client an apple tree to grow? They can say, hey, you know what? My favorite apple tree is Honeycrisp. Oh my God, I love
hmm
it. So I want to grow a Honeycrisp.
hmm
And I also want to grow Bartlett pears because those ones do really well. Like, I really like them.
hmm
So, what do you do when people say, these are the cultivars I would like to grow?
hmm
And if they don't actually grow in your climate?
Right. So I'll educate the customer about what's possible for our climate because we are so far south. We have very mild winters here. And so for all of the stone fruits, peaches, plums, nectarines, apricots, and cherries, and the palm fruits, so the apples and pears and quince, the limiting factor for them is chilling hours. So, all of those trees need to be exposed to a certain amount of cold before they will bloom. And it's kind of how the trees know that it's springtime. And so that's one of the things I learned more about from you, Susan, was that and correct me if I'm wrong, there's hormones in the trees when the leaves drop in the fall. And those hormones, as they're exposed to cool temperatures, those hormones start to degrade. And as those hormones degrade, then when they finally degraded, then the tree knows that it's springtime and it's time to bloom. So there's certain cultivars that, need a long chilling time, a large number of chilling hours in order to bloom and produce fruit. And so they will not work here in Austin because our winters are so mild and relatively short compared to, the rest of North America. So that's the limiting factor here is we need low chill hour fruits. So we're around, it's changing because of climate change. Our winters are getting more mild in terms of like day-to-day temperatures. But they're also getting colder in terms of like our cold snaps are becoming more severe. So when it does get cold and we have a freeze, it gets colder than it used to. So it's a little bit complicated, but I usually look for varieties that need about 500 hours, um, around 500 chill hours. And if we're in town in Austin, we have the urban heat island effect where like cities stay warmer than surrounding areas because there's more pavement that holds heat. So in town, I might go for even less, even fewer chill hours. But if I'm working with someone who's like north of Austin and more, out in a rural area, then I'll go a little bit higher, like closer to 600 or 650.
So,
Hmm.
Colleen, how much choice do you actually have? Like when I hear about people, oh, you're in a warmer climate, you're probably growing Anna apples. I don't know what the chill
Yeah,
hours are for Anna apples. Um, but is there like two choices or do you have a good selection?
we're very limited, to be honest. We're very limited. We have what I would say is like a barely adequate selection. Anna and Einshemmer are the two apples that I've had the most success with apples, but there's others that will grow. I have had some success with Gala and Golden Delicious, but those are a little bit, you can get those at the store. They're not that exciting, but so it is an issue for us, and the availability of those varieties is an issue too. There's not very many outlets for us to purchase low chill hour varieties. So that is a problem.
Interesting. Yeah, I actually
Mhm.
did an episode of this podcast, Best Apple Trees for Warm Climates with
Ooh,
Larry
hoo, hoo, hoo.
Stevenson.
I listened
And
to it. Hmm.
he's so interesting. So he's
Hmm.
got lots of different cultivars that can survive in warmer climates.
Hmm.
Whether they're easy to grow or not, he doesn't know. He's not, but like, why not try? If you've got the space, for
Hmm.
sure. But I
Yeah.
suppose if you, only have room for one tree, you want it to be something interesting that grows easily in a warm climate, you might choose Anna. Or what was the second variety?
Einshemmer.
Einshemmer. Okay.
Einshemmer,
Yeah,
is another
interesting.
one that I think is actually, I can't remember the relationship, but it's somehow related to Anna.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Hmm.
Yeah, I look forward to looking that up. Now,
Hmm.
saying this, if people are listening from colder climates, you
Hmm.
got the same problem. Like
Hmm.
you may be getting a tree that, like you're limited to trees that can only survive in really cold climates. So
Hmm.
basically, what we're saying is one of your next challenges is to find the exact right tree that
Hmm.
will suit your climate and conditions, and
Yeah.
that's where so many people make mistakes.
Hmm.
So, all right. So you take people through the tree choice, but I guess at some point you want to look at their soil and
Yeah.
figure out what's going there. So, what is your thought process around soil?
Yeah. If someone is interested in planting an orchard and they're really serious about a large number of fruit trees, I always recommend doing a soil test, and digging a test hole too, just so we can get a feel for how much soil they have because there's different areas in central Texas that have different soil types. The soil types vary a lot here, and um, in general, in West Austin and west of Austin, it's very hilly and rocky, and there tends to be very thin soil in a lot of places, and can't dig a hole, really. Like there's just not much soil to work with. And then in central Austin and east of Austin, we tend to have heavy clay soil and maybe about 2 feet of heavy clay soil. And then there's pockets all over central Texas that have deeper sandy soil, like along rivers and creeks and stuff like that, or old floodplains. So I can make educated guesses about what folks are going to have based on what part of town they're in, but I'm often surprised. And so we'll go ahead and try to dig a test hole, see what it's like to dig, and then usually take some samples and send them off to the lab to see what nutrients we'll need because the domesticated fruit trees, they're pretty heavy feeders. They need pretty good soil compared to the native wild plants that are better adapted. So we need to know what we have first before we start anything.
I love that. And I love the fact that you have everything there. Everybody that's
Yeah,
listening, either you have clay or sandy, or you've got like loam or whatever, but you've got a whole selection.
yeah, yeah.
One of the stories that you told in one of our classes that we did together in our meetups
Mm,
was the wonderful solution
mm,
that you came up with when it comes to heavy clay soil.
hmm.
I'd love for you to tell me that story. What was this? What was this design? What was this
Yeah.
location? What were their goals? And what were the problems and solutions?
So I was working with a family who has a farm um, southeast of Austin in the Blackland Prairie ecoregion, and that's like really heavy black clay soil. And we had planted fruit trees on their property directly into the clay and made a small orchard, and it was doing okay. And they wanted to add on to another section. And I started thinking about it and I was like, these trees, they're not thriving. They're doing okay in the clay, but they're not thriving. And at the time, they had just dug a new pond, like they keep cattle. So because Texas, they keep cattle. So they had just dug a new like tank for the cattle to like drink out of and for them to catch water. They call it a tank in Texas, but it's just like a big pond. And so they just dug a new pond and they had a whole bunch of soil like from that digging. And they also had a big pile of sand from like another project. They actually had a party and they had a bouncy house at the party and they needed sand. They put sand like under the bouncy house. So they had a whole bunch of sand. And I was like, well, this clay holds water for so long and it doesn't allow a lot of air penetration into the soil to so that the roots can really get the air that they need and that the microbes that support the trees can get the air that they need. So I thought, well, let's try planting into mounds. And what we did was we took the soil from the pond that they just dug and the sand from the bouncy house, and we brought in compost and we mixed those together and sort of made a custom soil mix basically on site. Mixed that together. Um, I believe I can't remember the exact ratio, but I believe we did clay to compost 1 to 1 and then half part sand. So half as much sand. And we mixed that together and then we planted into mounds, also known as berms, BERM, berms, and made the berms they're like about 5 feet wide, maybe 4 or 5 feet wide, and about 18 inches high. And they have better drainage and more nutrition than the native soil because of the sand and the compost that we mixed in. Yeah, and then we planted the fruit trees into the berms on the tops of the berms.
So if I'm getting this correctly, you've got this heavy soil. The trees are okay, but they're not thriving
Mm-hmm.
because the heavy clay soil means that air can't get into the soil. Roots need water and
Mm-hmm.
they also need air.
Mm-hmm.
So by planting on these very big berms or
Mm-hmm.
mounds,
Yeah.
you're allowing the roots to stretch out to a certain extent
Mm-hmm.
above that heavy clay soil line.
Mm-hmm.
Um, do you think like 5 feet by, let's even a feet round circle, fruit tree roots go way past that.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
where do the roots go after? Do they go down and then, but they, how does that work as far as you know?
Well, Susan, I always say that I wish that I had X-ray vision. Like that would be my superpower if I had one.
Yeah.
I could see where the roots are going. I don't really know, and my my theory that I can't really prove unless I dug up a really good, happy, healthy tree, which I don't want to do, to see where the roots are going. My theory is that, some of the roots can stay in a little bit more shallow where there's more nutrients and air, and they're feeding on the nutrients in the air. And then maybe there's other roots that get down deeper into the clay and they're able to get more water and moisture during drought. I'm not really sure.
What's
Um,
fun is that in one of our meetups, when, we were talking about clay soil, Ron Perry, who's been on this show before, he actually did dig up some healthy trees because he was doing some studies on planting on mounds.
oh, wow.
And he actually, if I can find it, I'll put a picture in the edited
Yeah.
version of this. They did a cross section and they saw that the roots were definitely filling the mound, but they fought their way also down into the clay.
Hmm.
So, Ron was saying it works. We've done some studies. There have been some published studies. There probably should be lots more. But it's just a creative solution. What I like about this
Hmm.
story is don't just think, well, I want fruit trees. I've got some problems. I'll just stick them in the ground anyways. Like there are ways to work with a property
Hmm.
to make it more sustainable in the long
Yeah.
term.
Yeah, and definitely these fruit trees that are growing in the mounds are thriving and definitely grew faster than the ones that were planted directly into the clay. Even though we did amend the clay, we did add some compost to the clay and some fertilizers according to the soil test. But definitely the ones in the mounds were really uh, producing better than the ones in the ground. Hmm.
Talk to me a little bit about the community orchards you've been involved
Hmm.
in and
Hmm.
how design is catered to their needs, and how that's worked out.
Yeah, it's interesting. The two community orchards that I worked in, I kind of I arrived after they had been planted or partially planted, and I really got to see in those experiences how complicated orcharding can be and how you really have to plan ahead to get the right trees because the one orchard I was in, they planted all Bartlett pears and they don't get enough chill hours. They never really bloomed. They did manage to leaf out every spring and looked okay, but that was it, and they didn't have a partner variety to pollinate either. And most pears need two different varieties in order to make fruit. So, I'd come in and inevitably with fruit trees, the domestic fruit trees, something's going to go wrong. One of them's going to die. Something's going to die because they're just vulnerable to so many diseases and problems, and animals eat the trunks and stuff like that. So as soon as some of those Bartletts started to die, I started replacing them with other varieties that would actually make fruit. And if the Bartletts ever bloomed, which they probably won't, but if they ever bloomed, maybe these other varieties would be able to pollinate them. So it was things like that where I was kind of coming in after the fact and saying, like, oh, okay, well, we've got this, but that's not exactly going to work. How can we kind of actually, I think that happened in the other orchard. I think the other orchard had Bartlett's too. And it's just because there's a variety called Southern Bartlett. And it's just like what's available in the southern US. Um, if you try to buy pear trees and you're a landscaper and you're not exactly a fruit tree expert, like it's really likely that you're going to find like Southern Bartlett pears at the wholesaler, and they're just not going to make fruit here. So just editing like that. I did a lot of editing like that and filling in. And, uh, there were, oh, I think I sent you a picture, Susan, they planted Asian persimmons and they were very floppy, like they were whips that had been instead of planted bare root, they were like whips that had been staked and then put in containers and then planted. And they didn't chop the top of the tree off. And so I kind of didn't know at the time. I was still learning too. I didn't know at the time that you're supposed to, after you plant a whip, chop the top of the tree off. And so I kept trying to stake them and they're floppy. And eventually one broke in a windstorm. And then when I saw how it grew back, it was like, oh, no, you're supposed to chop them. Yeah, this is why you chop the top off. Okay, I get this now, you know. But something that to get more to the point of your question, like something that I always ask my customers is like, for your orchard, do you want really high production? Like, do you want to get a lot of fruit out of it? Or do you want the orchard to like look pretty and be inviting? Because there's different pruning styles. Depending on your goal, so if you're an orchardist professionally and you're like producing for market and that's how you're making your living, you're going to be pruning all your fruit trees down super short so you can harvest easily and you can see all the fruit and you can spray them and everything like that. But it's not the prettiest, right? It doesn't look very good. And so for home orchards, I'll ask people like, hey, do you want it to be like prettier? Then it's a different sort of management where like you want the trees to actually look like trees and you're okay with getting a ladder out to harvest them. And the urban orchards are a little bit more like that too. It's a little bit more like, look at these beautiful little trees and we're going to prune them so they'll produce some fruit, but we're not going to, you know, um, well, like in the orchard people courses from you, Susan, I learned about like UFO pruning except for cherries, right?
Yeah.
And they're trying, it's basically like a stick with a few branches on a stake. And there's nothing, I mean, there's still plants, but it's not beautiful at all. And you wouldn't recognize it as a tree. Like a layperson wouldn't recognize it as a tree, right? So that's why with the urban orchards, and the home orchards, you'll kind of use a little bit more relaxed, pruning system that supports the tree, but, still makes the tree look nice and kind of inviting. And, people recognize it as a fruit tree.
Amazing. I just love everything you said. You
Oh,
started
good.
off with the experience of was it Bartlett Pear Orchard.
Hmm. Hmm.
And it just made me giggle because That's what I would have done. It's like, oh, I
Yeah,
like
for
Bartlett
sure.
pears. Let's get 100 trees and we'll have lots of
Yeah.
Bartlett pears, not realizing that fruit trees often need pollination partners.
Hmm.
And there's so many reasons not to plant all of one variety. There's lots of reasons that you
Hmm.
have to harvest it all at the same time because the harvest time
Right.
will be the same.
Totally.
So, big mistake people make is not researching pollination. And it's really cute to hear that story, but it's also an example of, was this the right tree for the climate? Well, clearly,
Hmm.
if it's not even blossoming,
Hmm.
could that have to do with chill hours? Could that have to do with plant hardiness zones? All of that
Hmm.
could have didn't have to happen had
Hmm.
research been done. And
Yeah.
hey, I've been there. I made all these mistakes, so I am not criticizing.
Hmm.
I've done
Hmm.
it myself. But
Yeah.
it's just when you know these secrets, these little secrets ahead of time, you
Yeah.
can just save yourself so much trouble.
Yeah, for sure. The other thing I was just thinking too is those Bartlett pears, available like from the wholesalers, they're big trees too.
Hmm.
And that's something with the urban orchards, a lot of times, they want it to be like finished right away. Like they want it to be done. Like we're going to plant big trees that came in containers and they're just going
Oh,
to start making fruit right away, and that's not the best way to go about it. And, that's how a lot of the urban orchards get planted if they're part of a bigger landscape design scheme for a whole neighborhood. And so, I learned again in orchard people classes that the best thing is to plant the bare root whips and train them when they're little, and then train them up to be the shape and size that you want. And, but it is hard in an urban area to start with whips because especially if you have like landscaping crews caring for the areas around the trees, it's hard to even recognize them as trees because they're so small, and it's hard to protect them from mowing crews and the public in general and stuff like that. So it's you kind of have to like strike some kind of balance between planting whips and planting something that's like recognizable as a tree already,
we've
And
dealt
like
with that one in our
we
park. We
have,
recently planted. So, just for people listening who don't know what a whip is and what a bare root tree is. So, Colleen, you've been talking about, you mentioned that some people go to the garden center and they say, I want the biggest tree you have.
yeah,
And even if there's a piece of fruit hanging on it, it's like, whoa, I am ahead of the game. It's already producing
yeah,
fruit. I'm willing to pay hundreds of dollars for a tree that's going to give me a harvest this year.
yeah.
Okay. But it's short term thinking because the tree gets totally traumatized by being, you know, replanted in a different environment.
Mhm,
Its roots are already stuck in that pot, and you
mhm,
think you're ahead of the game. But if right beside that tree you plant a whip, which is a 1 year old newly grafted tree, not too long ago, 1 year before, just looks like a stick. Basically, maybe it
mhm,
has little side branches, maybe it doesn't. It's you get it in during the dormant season. It has no soil on its roots because it's dormant. It can be transported
mhm,
that way. You plant it, you do the whip cut, cutting
mhm,
off, let's say, at least the top third of the tree, and then boom, you start to
mhm,
shape your tree from there with correct fruit tree pruning.
mhm.
So that's what you're talking about in terms of a
Yeah.
bare root whip.
Hmm.
So this year, earlier in the season, we planted a little seedling peach tree, actually grown from
Oh,
seed, not a
ooh,
grafted tree. Little
uh-huh.
cutie.
Ooh, from
Um,
seed?
it was,
Neat.
yes, that's kind of
Ooh,
exciting. We got
yeah.
that from Silver Creek Nursery,
Ooh.
seedling tree. Anyways, so we did the whip cut, even though it's not a whip, it's a seedling, but we still want to
Mhm,
shape the tree.
mhm,
And I thought, how do we protect it? And years ago, I had some plastic tree rings. They're just like little plastic mini sort of walls or whatever. So
mm.
it's like the mulch circle. It goes around the edge of the mulch circle and it tells the tree crew, hey, there is a plant here. Stay away. You
Yeah,
know,
don't mow it
eh,
down.
don't mow it
Hmm.
down. And
Yeah.
we also put a big stake in there and, used a figure eight tie thing to tie it to the stake, even though right now it doesn't need a stake, but it's just another
Hmm.
way of saying, hey, tree here, stay away.
Hmm.
So that's
Right.
how we get away with using the whips. And I'm very
Yeah.
passionate, as you know, about planting younger trees
Hmm.
and sculpting those trees with correct fruit tree pruning from starting from the day you plant your tree, you're going to be pruning that tree into the perfect fruit bearing structure that will last a lifetime, that will be resilient in harsh weather. I love to tell the story about our young trees after being Red Wheelbarrow Landscape Consulting in the ground and pruned properly for a few years. We had a big
Hmm.
ice storm.
Mm.
2013, we had a really big ice storm, and trees around our city were falling down left, right, and center.
Mm.
Like it looked like a disaster zone. I was
Yeah.
really worried about our fruit trees. So I go to the park and I see, big trees, broken branches everywhere, but
Yeah.
our little fruit trees, not one branch broke.
Wow.
And
Amazing.
that's because
Yeah.
we prune fruit trees
Hmm.
in order to create a strong fruit bearing structure for the
Hmm.
tree.
Hmm.
So for the tree, it's like, hey, I'm designed to hold a bunch of fruit. Some
Hmm.
ice on me, that's no problem. I can
Hmm.
handle that.
Hmm.
So to me, it's like you and I, as we go through our adventures with fruit trees, we learn so much,
Yeah.
and all the science and all the things that we're trying,
Yeah.
sometimes you have to see it firsthand in order to say, yeah, that really works.
Yeah.
And sometimes you have to try things and see if it really doesn't work,
Right.
you know?
Right.
So like another little fun thing that I tried was, at one point I was exploring what's the difference between winter and summer pruning, and I had two apricot trees. They were planted at the exact same time, same cultivar. And I decided one year I was going to do winter pruning on one and summer on the other to
Ooh.
see what the difference was.
Ooh.
And it was very interesting.
What happened?
So, what happened was with the winter prune tree, I got a
Uh-huh.
lot of water sprouts. I got lots of branchy growth that I didn't want. I had bad air circulation, so lots of leaves in there, so more likelihood to get disease.
Uh-huh.
And for the summer prune one, it kept its beautiful structure, nice and open. So, but I had
So
read, I had
interesting.
learned, but it was me trying it on the two trees.
Yeah.
That was like, okay, it does work.
Right.
I've seen it. It does work. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
anyways, back to our
Yeah.
conversation. The other thing that you
Sure.
mentioned that you talked about, we didn't mention rootstocks. I've done episodes on rootstock choices, which
Yeah.
determine the mature size of the tree.
Mm-hmm.
But one thing that there's always a little stress when we're planting a tree. It's like, how far should it be away from another tree?
Yeah.
So
Mm-hmm.
talk to me about, people's choices. Do they want the big tree? If they want the big, pretty tree that they need to use a ladder with,
Mm-hmm.
how far away should it be from local
Mm-hmm.
shrubs and other trees? Or if it's a small tree, like a dwarfing
Mm-hmm.
tree on a dwarfing rootstock, how far away would you plant these or design in your design?
Yeah, it just depends. We don't have a whole lot of dwarf. We don't have access to dwarf rootstock around here. I don't remember why. I know there's a reason why there's no dwarf rootstocks available around here, but I can't remember what it is. This is a wild generalization. Generally going to keep them about 15 feet apart, but just sort of like as a jumping off point, you know. But it depends on the situation and what we're growing. Um, with the farm that we were talking about earlier, where we planted into mounds, I designed it where the mounds were on contour with the grade of the site. Um, so that way they would catch water when it rains. Um, and so the site was just ever slightly, just really slightly sloped, and I kind of made them more curved. And the curviness sort of allowed for the trees to be a little bit planted a little bit closer together. The trees are circles. And so you can kind of fit circles in closer together when they're on a curved line rather than a straight line. So it sort of allowed for them to be a little bit closer together. And the intention is to keep them pruned, and that particular orchard, we were mostly growing apples that tend to be, apples tend to have a pretty big upright structure and aren't super wide. And we were growing Asian pears that are extremely upright. And then we were growing stone fruits that you can trim very heavily. And we tend to do heading cuts on the stone fruits. At least my preference is with stone fruits is to trim them to an open base shape and do a lot of heading cuts to make sure their branches don't get overextended where the fruit is out at the end of the branch and causes the branches to break. So I tend to keep them kind of short to get them to fit into that plan. Does that make sense?
Yes, that absolutely makes sense.
Okay.
Let's just go. You've created this design. Maybe you even are there for planting day. How
Yeah.
you talk about this is for DIY people.
Yeah.
How do you walk away and leave them with the knowledge that they need in order to care for those trees? Like you've been talking about your
Mm.
pruning, strategies, and there's irrigation strategies, and what do they feed the tree
Hmm.
or trees? How do you leave it with them? Do they already know what to do somehow?
Hmm. It depends on the customer, if they're truly DIYers and we're just putting a few trees in their backyard, most of the time then we'll schedule in a visit for pruning time. And I will do another consultation with them and we'll do the pruning together. I often recommend orchard people classes too for people who I can tell are really into it, are really interested in more in-depth learning. Um, for the folks who are larger properties with gardeners, like the farm that we've been talking about, and a couple other farms and ranches that I have worked on, I'll often leave a like a info package for them saying like do this at this time with a calendar, and still make myself available if the crew there needs more consultations. So there's usually some sort of info package that I'll leave, or I'll have a relationship with the gardeners, and they can text me when they have questions and stuff.
It's fantastic.
Thanks.
Before we wrap up, I want to talk about the work you're doing with the Seed Savers organization.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the Central Texas Seed Savers.
Yeah.
Originally you had talked, you and I are arborists, we have passion with fruit trees, and I thought, wow, that's cool that you're interested in seeds. I never realized that fruit tree seedlings are maybe part of your mission. Tell me about the
Yeah.
organization.
Well, like you said earlier, Central Texas Seed Savers is working to prevent extinction of plants that are important to Central Texans. And a lot of the plants that thrive here in Central Texas, whether it's fruit trees, vegetables, or native plants, there's a lot of really great plants that aren't available widely in nurseries or from seed companies. And so for us, it's really important to share those seeds with each other. Or in the case of fruit trees, sometimes we're sharing cuttings and scions and rootstocks. And it's important for us to share those to preserve access to them, because they're not widely available. They may be available from one or two seed companies or one or two fruit tree nurseries, but that's not sustainable long term. We need to have more access to them to prevent them from going extinct. And a lot of these plants, particularly the domestic fruit trees, if we weren't growing them as backyard gardeners, we would lose them and they would go extinct. They're not growing on their own. So there's a local cidery here, a place that makes hard cider called Texas Keeper Cider. And they named their cidery Texas Keeper after an extinct apple. There used to be an apple called Texas Keeper, and it was called Texas Keeper because it could keep for a long, it had a long shelf life. So you could keep it, you could harvest it in the fall and eat them all winter. So they were real shelf stable. And so when I heard that, I started thinking about fruit tree culture in Central Texas, and there used to be a lot more fruit tree varieties here, and there was a strong culture of fruit tree cultivation here at one time, but a lot of those varieties have gone extinct post after World War II, post World War II, and the industrialization of agriculture and fewer, backyard gardeners. And so, um, Central Texas Seed Savers is, we have a fruit tree scion swap every winter to get everyone together to share scions. And we have a heirloom fruit tree preservation project where we're teaching people how to graft. We just kicked that off last year. Last year was our first year with our grafting classes. And we're asking folks in Central Texas to contact us if they have a fruit tree that is very productive, makes pretty good fruit, and doesn't need a lot of care. To try to get more of these good trees into the mix for us to increase access um, to fruit trees and all the plants too. It's true with vegetables and with the native plants as well. So that's what we're working on, and it's my sort of educated guess that the fruit trees are most at risk of like all of the groups of plants because they require some extra knowledge to grow them. And because growing a tree is a big commitment, not everybody has room for more trees. And they're not particularly long-lived compared to other trees, especially the stone fruits, have a tendency to die after, 15 or 20 years. Most of the peaches have a tendency to fall apart or just kind of drop dead from disease and stuff like that. So yeah, we're just trying to get people together who are fruit enthusiasts in Central Texas and to share scions and um I love hearing about other fruit people growing like peaches from seeds and stuff like that to see what happens. And yeah, it's exciting to me. So that's what's going on with Central Texas Seed Savers and the fruit part. Yeah.
Oh, it's fantastic. And you've been doing this for a long time. What keeps you motivated with this work?
Oh, well, I have an obsessive personality. I just find it continually engaging, to me, like all the plants, there's just so much to know and learn all the time. I'm always learning something new, and particularly with the fruit trees, the fruits are just their whole own realm of knowledge. And I mean, I feel like you could dedicate your life to growing apples alone, just apples, and never learn everything there is to know just about apples. And I think for me, I always go back to um, gardening as the foundation for civilization. For hundreds of thousands of years, humans were hunter-gatherers and moving around. And someone said, what if we took these seeds and planted them in the ground and stayed in one place? Oh, well, then we don't have to move around all the time and the food's right here. We don't have to follow the food. The food's right here. So that's the foundation of civilization. Then we started settling and building and creating societies. And I guess when I engage in this kind of work, particularly the fruit trees, I feel like I'm engaging in human civilization and I'm connecting with not only nature and connecting with where my food comes from, which is so vital and crucial to our lives and so enriching to our lives. I'm also connecting with humanity and one of the oldest professions
Yeah.
and and a whole deep realm of knowledge of human knowledge and it brings meaning to my life.
That
Hmm.
is so awesome. I totally hear you. I agree with you so much. Instead
Hmm.
of like reading the newspaper while I was eating my lunch, I started to think about the people that grew the vegetables.
Yes, yes.
Or
Hmm.
I started to think of the people that packed them, or I started to think
Yeah,
about the trees that produce them. If I didn't grow it myself, who took it off the tree and who
yeah,
harvested it? And I started to just send this feeling of love and gratitude through to everybody who was involved in bringing this
yeah,
beautiful nutrition to my plate.
yeah,
Oh, I hear you. There is so much more than just popping a tree in the ground and
yeah.
waiting for the harvest. It's just beautiful. It's so much gratitude,
Hmm.
and I'm so grateful to have you on the show. This was so
Thank
fun.
you. Yeah.
Um, how can people learn more about you?
They can visit atxgardens.com. That's ATX as in Austin, Texas.
Colleen, thank you so much for coming on the show today. It's been wonderful to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me, Susan. I so appreciate it.
So, for you listeners, we are hoping to create an article with more information because Colleen talked about a whole bunch of great stuff. So, we'll put it in the article. You can look at, if you're on YouTube, look at the show notes and you can go straight to the article. We'll include the URL. And please remember to hit like and subscribe.
Okay.
For more fruit tree care information, you can go to orchardpeople.com and sign up. You can sign up for my newsletter where you'll get information about anything new, new books, new podcasts, whatever is going on. So I would love it if you would sign up. And if you have a question, you can always just send me an email back once you get the first email from me. So that's all for now. I hope you will join me again next month when we're going to dig into another great topic. I'll see you then, and bye for now.